So welcome everybody. Once again, we have this opportunity to have this conversation with Dan Cozort. Has been guiding us through all the aspects of the polycrisis, the convergence of so many crises that are happening in the world at the same time. Not only the climate, the ecological crisis, the extinction of wildlife, and our impending extinction as well, the extinction of the human race, if we don't change the ways that we have been living. So I'm going to pass the baton on to Dan at this time. And once again, Dan, thank you for being with us. It has been really enlightening, illuminating.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here, actually. Yeah, it's very nice to talk with you all about this. To me, it's very important. I hope it's very important to you too. The perspective that Buddhism can bring to the crisis that we have going here, I think, is an important one, and it would be good to share it with others. So I've been talking about this in three main areas. One was called correcting mistaken views. And that would be any view that views us as somehow separate from other people in our environment. The second part was about modeling ethical behavior, and we're sort of in the middle of that right now. We've talked about the Buddhist value of not harming. That could be the basis of an environmental ethic. And then I went on to talk about what's being called Buddhist economics. I mean, like economics as if Buddhists were in charge of things, which is a critique of capitalism. And I'll be going on with that now to talk about consumerism in particular, which is what Stephanie Kaza has called, might be the primary field for Buddhist practice in modern times. And then finally, we'll come to promoting social resilience. Anyway, I'll share screen now, and just got to find the right place to be. When we stopped last time, I stopped here and, was talking about the ways in which Buddhist economics kind of are socialistic, definitely, but, that our present economy is actually socialistic in a lot of ways, because we have things such as Medicare and public education and so forth, and are just exceeded in that by the way European democracies handle it. But this all goes to the general point that we're not only personally interdependent, but also socially interdependent. I think last time I had quoted what Elizabeth Warren had said in 2012 that caught my interest. Nobody in this country got rich on his own. Nobody. And she was talking about a concept called social capital, which gets defined in different ways, but we can understand it, I think, as meaning that if you have a stable society and you have all the infrastructure such as road and schools and police and communication and all of this sort of stuff, it provides a basis for you to succeed in life. So Nobel Prize-winning economist Herbert Simon estimated that for the average American or European, social capital accounted for 90% of our wealth. Think about that. It means if you're born in America or Europe to a middle-class family, that you have quite a leg up on just about everybody else in the world in terms of, where you can go. Malcolm Gladwell in the book Outliers put this in a way that I think is arresting. The tallest oak in the forest is not the tallest because it grew from the hardiest acorn. It's tall because no other trees blocked its sunlight, because the soil around it was deep and rich, because no rabbit or deer ate it when it was a seedling, and because no lumberjack has yet, cut it down. So that's where we are. So social enlightenment, I'm saying, would be breaking down the delusion that we are self-sufficient and independent of others. So there's lots more things that could be said about how to tame capitalism and so on, but I want to move on to consumerism. So this will be just the last little tag end of a comment here on Buddhist economics. The nation of Bhutan is one that has established something other than gross domestic product as a way for measuring whether or not a society is doing a good idea. And he's calling it gross national happiness, or sometimes gross domestic happiness. So it's a philosophy that guides the government of Bhutan. Bhutan is a Himalayan kingdom that is really ethnically Tibetan and religiously Buddhist. So really, it's a Tibetan Buddhist country, and it's run by a king. And one of them in 1972 declared that gross national happiness was the most important thing. That sustainable development should take a holistic approach towards notions of progress and give equal importance to non-economic aspects of well-being, so that he established what he called 4 pillars of gross national happiness, including environmental conservation. There are lots of places that have tried to adopt some version of Bhutan's program. For instance, several U.S. cities, such as Seattle and Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and states such as the state of Vermont are using some version of this gross happiness index. There are various places in Canada, Brazil, Thailand, the Philippines, the UK, and the United Arab Emirates who also are using some version of the Bhutan index. So it's not just a one-off sort of thing. It's being taken seriously in some places. Okay, so I wanted to move on to the general topic of consumerism and how it encourages the 3 poisons of delusion, ill will, and greed. So this is, for most of us, our point of greatest involvement in the climate crisis. It's the area where we personally have some kind of agency. And as I've mentioned, Stephanie Kaza suggested that mindfulness of our consumption might be the dominant practice field of our time. But, I just wanted to say a word about attachment first, because it's such a dirty word, it seems, in Buddhism. But it's an ambiguous word. So it can be negative in the sense that we are attached to things we want, or it can be positive in the sense that we form loving attachments to friends and family. So I like to describe Buddhism as a religion that discourages negative attachment and fosters positive attachment. There's nothing wrong with love. There's nothing wrong with compassion. These are emotions that we want to develop. But we have to be cautious about mixing them, of course, because sometimes my loving attachment is partly needy on my part. I get validation or enhanced status, for instance, from it. So, you have to be mindful of this. If you give a charitable contribution, for instance, it is a positive thing. That's good. However, I think you should do so anonymously, because nothing pumps up our pride like having our names on the top of the children's wing of the hospital, or even, on the list of donors, for the charitable event. Okay, well, going on to consumerism. The idea of wealth is not a new idea, but until the 19th century, when newspapers became so prevalent, there are probably very few people outside of the elites who really had any experience of what elite life was like. But this changed, especially in America after the Civil War, reaching a peak in what's now called the Gilded Age. These elites engaged in what came to be called conspicuous consumption, showing off your wealth by parading around in nice clothes in these new things called motor cars and so forth. Even so, without television and the internet, most people didn't really see the wealthy and try to emulate them. And as yet, there wasn't any commercialization of the household. But things have changed. Now there's twice as many shopping malls in America as there are high schools. Advertising is so ubiquitous that you can't pump gasoline or walk around a grocery store without being bombarded by it. And the nature of advertising has changed too. The algorithms of Facebook and Google and so forth can be said to maybe know us better than we know ourselves. and are reinforcing certain tendencies in a quite relentless way. So it hasn't been around very long, really, but we have come to see it as natural that we consume more and more, that economies grow more and more, and so forth. That's the big trick that's happened on us. And we now have a new Gilded Age, perhaps. I also wanted to, this is something that intrigues me as a scholar of religion, the idea that consumerism is itself a religion, a new religion. And Stephanie Kaza and David Loy are Buddhist writers who often compare this consumerism to a religion. So religions generally have different aspects to them. There's religious experience, um, and this would include the special type of experience of shopping that lifts the spirits of many people. There's a kind of ecstasy that comes with the acquisition of new things, or it can be therapeutic, right? People talk about retail therapy, for instance. And it has its sacred places for communal gatherings, such as glittering shopping malls. Sometimes people go on pilgrimages to large city shopping areas. It can be viewed as an ideology where the primary goal of life is happiness. Usually religions recognize that this life may not be very happy, but tell us that the next one or the eternal one will be. But consumerism promises happiness now. It also says that owning things is the primary means to happiness. And it says that social superiority comes from conspicuous consumption. I've spoken before about this great book by Elaine de Botton called Status Anxiety. In the course of human civilization, which is just a very small slice of the timeline of life, there have been and continue to be many ideologies of hierarchy, right? Racism, for instance, so white is better than brown, which is better than black. Sexism, so male is better than female, and imperialism, and religious prejudice, and classism, and so forth. Now, if you reject all of those means of social hierarchy, what makes me better than you? Namely, it's my identity as a consumer. My standard of living is higher than yours. But that doesn't do me any good unless everybody knows it. So I have to be conspicuous. I need to fly. And within that, if I can afford it, first class. I need a nice car. I need nice clothes. I need to be seen going to good restaurants. I need nice clothes. I need to travel. I need to go to concerts and sporting events, and on and on and on. Everyone will then admire me, and I won't have status anxiety. By the way, this phrase conspicuous consumption goes back to 1899 when Thorstein Veblen, a sociologist, said conspicuous consumption of valuable goods is a means to reputability to the gentleman of leisure. The idea is you can buy expensive things because they are expensive, which shows that you can afford them, which makes other people admire you. How about the ritual aspect? Well, I've already spoken about how people love to go shopping. They engage in retail therapy. Advertising has become so highly targeted that we're being trained to go further into things with which we show any interest. I mean, if you're on Amazon, for instance, and you're looking at things, you'll be presented with more and more things that are similar to that, right? Trying to plumb further your interest. Also, we could point to the fact that previous religious holidays, such as Christmas, have really become holidays for the new religion of consumerism. The Christmas season begins with a special consumerist holiday, which is called Black Friday, now supplemented with Cyber Monday, Giving Tuesday, and on like this, right? It's part of the religion of consumerism. The ethical dimension is pretty simple. I think it's right and just that I spend money on myself because I earned it. Also, I understand that I have a moral obligation to be a consumer because I know that without consumption, people will lose jobs, governments won't collect enough in taxes and so forth. I got to do my part. And then the social dimension is I get a particular social identity from being a consumer. If I drink Coke, if I eat at McDonald's, if I buy an Apple computer and so forth, I belong to a worldwide society. Some people even turn products into team mascots, so to speak. So you might be part of a Harley Davidson motorcycle group, for instance. And then we can say that maybe consumers are divided into sects, which is a religious term, by the brands that they display. Well, Buddhism, of course, finds problems with this. You're using consumption to give ourselves a false identity, which is an aspect of delusion. Our primary delusion is a sense of separation between ourselves and others in our environment. And the problem is that the more deeply we relate to material objects as real and permanent, the more deeply we think of ourselves as fixed objects or selves with specific identities. So attachment to a false view of self can lead to more and more need for self-reinforcing possessions. Then consumerism also makes possible the creation of a highly defined identity that stands out from the crowd. So you have ownership of a certain um, type and brand of car, certain types of clothing, stuff of all sorts with brand names emblazoned on it. So, so I have a nice car, let's say I have a Porsche. I relish my identity as a Porsche driver. But what makes me one? I'm not inherently a Porsche driver, but only one in relation to a car. And then I'm really dependent upon the manufacturer, the highway department, the oil companies, and so forth to be one. But, we overlooked all of that interdependent stuff in the display of this brandism. Anyway, it places so much emphasis on me, the individual, that I become less involved in society. And then, more time on individual pleasure and pursuits and less on civic engagement and family life is going to ensue from that. We can also point out that, consumerism, of course, is greed. It practically is by definition. Wanting something because we need it to live is not greed, but greed is consumerism, buying for status. Advertising, of course, is what promotes this. Bill McKibben said the central theme of advertising everywhere is you are the most important thing on earth, and he calls this idolatry. I like that phrase. Also, it stokes aversion, which is the other side of attachment. So we get the anxiety of acquisition. We acquire something new, but it can be very stressful to acquire it, especially if we're going to go into debt to acquire it, or we have to fix it, or we have to keep maintaining it. Once we got it, we fear losing it. If we lose it or it breaks, there's anger, sadness, and depression. We all know that the more stuff we have, the more that can go wrong and all the hassles of that. So sometimes we think that the wealthy have it very easy, but in fact, they spend a lot of their time being worried about their stuff and protecting their stuff and whether or not they can trust the people that they have hired to protect their stuff and so on like that. It also leads to ill will. So consumerism promotes a sense of superior to those who don't have what we have. So advertisers have been playing on this for a long time. Keeping up with the Joneses was the catchphrase from the 1950s. The Joneses were the family next door, and if they got a TV set before you did, you felt bad. Consumers can also feel ill will towards others when there's any kind of scarcity. So there's many stories of people who get into fights with others when they're at the big box store at Christmas, when they're running out of the toy that's the hot item. And then in a social sense, consumerism undermines traditional values. Traditionalists are outraged at all the changes they see happening, the crass commercialization of everything, while at the same time, the hip people who want the latest thing resent the traditionalists. So there's a conflict between them. And then there's, pseudo woke consumerism. Many of us feel that we've managed to avoid the pitfalls of consumerism by buying differently, like we buy sustainably. So we bring bags to the grocery store, or we buy in bulk, or we go to thrift stores to buy clothing. And that's all good. But are we proud of it? Do we brag about it? in your social circle, it may very well give you higher status, that you got your stuff from thrift stores or sustainability, or that you have these sustainability stories. Chogyam Trungpa, the Tibetan teacher, had a wonderful expression, spiritual materialism. He meant the way in which we might display our spiritual values to get status with other people and feel good about ourselves. So, one thing would be like displaying Buddhist jewelry, such as malas or clothing or stuff you hang in your walls and so forth. And then there's the spiritual by contact element, people who brag about the teachers that they have had, or at least have been in the presence of. Even like being present at a teaching by the Dalai Lama, even if that a spiritual teaching happened in a stadium. So you don't realize it, but you've turned your enlightened approach to consumerism into another commodity, one that you're selling to your listener. This is Thupten Chodron, a Buddhist teacher in Washington State, and she reflected specifically on Buddhist consumerism. So one thing she talked about was the consumer mind among Buddhists, that you want entertainment from your teacher. You want the best teachings. You want a teacher who doesn't demand too much of you. There's one who will ask you to make, big lifestyle changes of some sort. She notes that, teachers have to be entertaining. And I thought immediately of Jetsun Akunlamo, this teacher that I brought Dickinson students to in Potomac, Maryland. She was called also in a book, The Buddha from Brooklyn, because that's where she was born. And she was recognized later in life as the reincarnation of a Tibetan teacher. But she was very entertaining because she was a Buddhist teacher who went to the gym, who got hair treatments and actually had invented a new kind of hair treatment, and, talked about buying clothing and stuff like that. Then also another thing that Thupten Chodron brings up is our resistance to generally supporting monks and nuns, because, we want to see that we got something for our donations, such as a building, a temple, or something like that. The reluctance to make a commitment. Americans want to shop around, for the Buddhist teacher. This would never happen in Asia, where you didn't have all these Buddhist traditions mixing in one place. But here, in a place like, say, Central Florida, you've got all these options available to you. And then, people are seeking status from, the different teachers that they've had or events they've gone to. And she reflected finally on how she has to market her talks, and thinking about, for instance, whether or not she wants to use the title Lama, which she is authorized to do, but doesn't want to do. And she's tempted to judge her own success by how many people come to hear her and so forth. I've been involved lately with a sangha in Houston, Texas, and they there have to consider how they can get more people to come either to the teachings that they give in person or the teachings that they give online. So you have to attract students, you have to find a way to keep them, and you have to maybe expand services so that you're giving them all the things that they want to need. These were not considerations that Asian Buddhist teachers ever had to come to the fore in the past, but it's because we are consumers and we have a consumerist mentality even about the Dharma. Okay, well then moving on, I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of these, I call them economic virtues. And I actually talked about this before because I wasn't planning to incorporate economics and consumerism into this discussion because I was only going to do 1 week, but I did go on. And so I've talked about this before and won't talk some more about it again, but generosity just in general has been identified as a virtue that is the positive counterpart to non-harming, and an excellent way to cultivate non-attachment and to understand impermanence and emptiness. And then contentment is also an extremely important virtue. The Buddha famously declared in the Dhammapada that contentment is the greatest wealth. I think that's a good one to commit to memory, frankly. It's one that I have, I know, for a long time. Contentment is the greatest wealth. So even if you're poor, if you're satisfied with what you've got, you're just as well off as somebody who has a lot more. I also like this phrase from the Zen teacher Katsuki Sakita: true freedom is freedom from your own desires. That's the aim of developing non-attachment, of course. But think about it, if you don't care whether or not you get this or that, or even frankly, whether you live longer, you are free from fear. But capitalism employs its seducer, consumerism, to make us feel dissatisfied, discontent, to tell us that our status is tied to our conspicuous consumption. So those people who have studied contentment say that you can be sure to live a life that's contented if you have these aspects to your lifestyle. First of all, have a moderately high income, an income above 75,000 for a family of four. That would be, in today's America. If you have less than that, you're probably struggling to pay the rent and to pay the basic bills, and you don't have any kind of lavish lifestyle at all. That's just, the way things are nowadays in this country. Secondly, and I think this is really important, who do you compare yourself to? And we're talking about status here. You should compare yourself to the rest of humankind, not to your immediate peers. I used to be so sad, when I was teaching at Dickinson College, this, high-priced private liberal arts college, that there were students who were sad all the time because they were comparing themselves only to their peers at the college instead of realizing how incredibly fortunate they were compared to most human beings, even to be there, much less to be doing, fairly well. A third aspect is to be employed, which is one reason why Buddhist economics places great emphasis on full employment. That is, everybody who wants a job should be able to have it. To come from a family with a stable marriage and to be married yourself, this is just an observation about what it is that sets people up for contentment. And finally, to be part of a community, to have roots in that community and to trust the other people who are in that community. If you have these basic lifestyle aspects, you're likely to be able to be contented more easily. And then there is frugality, which is the very opposite of the consumerist mentality. So frugality rejects the idea that each person or family unit should be self-sufficient. It's okay to be helped by the community in general, in one way or another. And it rejects planned obsolescence, which is the operating principle of a lot of manufacturing, going back to the 1950s. And they actually talked about it quite openly, how products should be designed to wear out after a certain amount of time so that we will buy more of them. Obviously, the benefits of frugality are that you can be happy with less, and that you'll probably have more time to do spiritual practice. Final thing about frugality is that it means less, but it doesn't necessarily mean poorer quality. You can have fewer things, but can invest in things of high quality that are durable and attractive. So, you might actually buy a car that's rated for giving less trouble and lasting longer, or you might invest in clothing that costs more, but is likely to last longer before it has to be replaced. Well, I see that it's 11:20 now, which means that we should probably stop this for today, but we've basically come to the end anyway of this portion of what I wanted to talk about. that is modeling ethical behavior. And so the last two sessions that we do tomorrow and on Friday can be about the last aspect, which is promoting social resilience. So I'll just stop there and see what you guys have to say and what you might want to ask questions about.
Thank you, Dan. Beautiful as always. Thank you for also mentioning that intriguing aspect of marketing the Dharma and even, our pride in saying that I am how do you say, a responsible consumer, or I have seen the Dalai Lama once, or I have taken a picture of that teacher. Oh, in any kind of religion, you want to, in any kind of group, you want to display the signs of identification. Perhaps you have a fish decal in the back of your car, or you have a Star of David, or things like this. So, and the malas
Yeah.
around the wrist. So
Pride is indeed a tricky thing.
it is. Um, and that's why we want to differentiate ourselves and distinguish ourselves from others and separate ourselves. And so we get into the trap
Yeah,
of
I'd just like to emphasize again that I really have come to think that the human tendency, I mean, it's biological for status is just a really important driving force to recognize. That, even when we get into a spiritual community, that there is there are status issues, and that people can have status anxiety about how other people view them from within this spiritual community. And then every other kind of group to which you belong everywhere, everybody's got status issues. And, it's where our buttons are being pushed. And it's where Buddhist, you can do Buddhist practice, recognizing that this is arising in you and, recognizing it for what it is, stepping back from it, and then trying to act differently within your group to recognize that we're all interdependent and we all have the same basic desires and needs.
going to stop recording now.
Right.